So this video is going to be a wild one, to put it very lightly. Since it is December and 2023 is coming to a close, it's only right to end this year with a bang. And since it's a special time, full of holiday cheer and joy, let's talk about an anime. Not just any anime, mind you, but probably one of the greatest animes hidden in the Shounen Jump lineup. That's right, guys. It's finally time to talk about Gintama.
これからアニメ銀魂再開にあたって坂田銀時氏による謝罪会見が行われる模様です。
今謝ったんで銀魂再開します。ふざけんな！サイコパス!
So Gintama is one hell of a series. For those unaware, Gintama is the science fiction action comedy series created by Hideaki Sorachi. It follows a samurai by the name of Sakata Gintoki, living in the late Edo period of Japan. He tries to make a living doing odd jobs now that the age of the sword ban is in full swing, meaning guys like him are left unemployed and disrespected by society. Also, Japan is conquered by aliens. Yeah, I should probably mention that part. So this is actually an alternate history story. Aliens came to Earth and accelerated the technological development of humanity, but at the same time, those old Edo period customs are still a part of society. So while you have stuff like cars and spaceships, people still dress in yukata and adhere to tradition. Really, it's an excuse to have pop culture references and more explosive humor, but it's not something that's just brushed aside either. A large part of the setting is that the shogunate government are just glorified puppets to the aliens, and they know it too, having to bend over backwards for a group of elitist assholes barging into their country and telling them what to do, all while giving zero shits about the people around them. Gintama has a really cool setting and lore, something hidden underneath the massive amounts of comedy, because first and foremost, Gintama is a comedy. Now this raises the question, is the series funny? The simple answer is yes. The longer answer is I laughed so hard at this series that it gave me actual headaches and I couldn't breathe. It's fantastic, and I've been excited to talk about this one for a bit. Just recently I finally sat down and finished the series all the way through, reading through the manga and watching the entire anime, and I came away with a simple statement. Gintama is incredible, but it does take a bit to get going. So I'm hoping this video can convince some of you guys to check the series out and stick with it, or give it another chance if it chased you off at the first try. Because I fully admit it can be a slow start, but once it gets going, you can easily find yourself balls deep into something you can comfortably call your new favorite series. I mentioned before that the story follows a guy by the name of Gintoki. Well, the cast is actually much larger than just him. It takes very little time at all before Gintama evolves into an ensemble comedy, building a cast of characters that all get their own dedicated episodes, story arcs, running gags, and quirks that make them memorable. The main trio of the series are Gintoki Sakata, the owner of Yorazuya, the anything store, who is a former warrior now living as a reckless man-child in Edo. He's addicted to sweets, broke as hell, and is a ferocious fighter, revealed to be an extremely talented samurai and one of the only few humans on Earth who stands a chance of ending the alien occupation. His assistant and best friend is Shinpachi Shimura, a nerdy teenager that Gintoki has to help out after he gets bullied by a group of aliens making trouble at the shop he worked at. Seeing Gintoki stand up for him inspires Shinpachi to become a samurai again. Losing hope in the field after the death of his father and failure of their dojo, barely kept afloat by what little money him and his older sister Tai can scrape together, they eventually rescue and recruit an alien girl named Kagura, part of the race known as the Yato, who are the strongest aliens in the known universe. Despite this, Kagura is very simple-minded, actually leaning towards just being completely stupid. She's just as reckless and irresponsible as Gintoki, using her powers for her own gain, and getting the gang into trouble more than a few times. This is just the main three, and even the descriptions I gave barely cover half of who they are. Oh, there's also Sadaharu, who is a very big dog. If you don't like Sadaharu, I don't like you. Well, the ensemble only grows bigger as the series goes on. You have characters such as Otose, the landlady that the trio constantly butts heads with, Catherine, a cat thief alien that directly parodies the typical cat girl character other manga do by making her absurdly ugly and just kind of an unpleasant asshole, Katsura, Gintoki's friend who runs a terrorist organization trying to topple the puppet government and restore the old Japanese way, free of aliens. The Shinsengumi, a secret police organization that work to find enemies of the government and threats to Japan. If it's not obvious, them and Katsura fight a lot. A masochistic ninja girl obsessed with Gintoki, a suicidal homeless man whose life always finds a new way to reach rock bottom, even the Shogun himself. There's a lot of characters in Gintama, and they all cover all sorts of jokes and gags. Some are complete caricatures with only really one gag to them, others are more normal and meant to be the contrast to the more insane ones, and then there's some who just get massive amounts of character development, to the point they can be unrecognizable by the time you get to the ending. And it can actually be pretty surprising figuring out which one falls into what category. You can have someone show up and you think that they'll only exist for a 5-minute gag, then 300 some odd episodes later they get a whole backstory dump and you find out they were incredibly important. Because Gintama has some really interesting pacing with its story. The vast majority of it is purely a gag manga, making fun of different manga series, Japanese culture, referencing famous movies, and sometimes just being pure nonsense for the sake of it. But then you have moments where it dips into something else, where it goes full mask off and gives you an action story, with a villain who's very much not a joke and the stakes become actual life and death. Now you think this would be a massive tonal shift compared to how the series usually is, because it almost never takes itself seriously 99% of the time. But honestly, the serious moments in Gintama are some of the highlights. Now before we get into that, let's give some more context about the series, because there's a lot of layers to Gintama that influence the series and the humor. For one, a lot of the characters are actually based off Japanese figures. Sort of. They're meant to be parodies of either famous Japanese legends or historical figures that influenced the Edo period. Reminder, this is technically an alternate history. The Shinsengumi were an actual organization, and they actually worked as the secret police of the Shogun. Katsura's terrorist organization was an actual thing, and he actually led it.
Though his real name was Kido Takayoshi, and he went by the alias Katsura Kogoro.
Though it was more in retaliation to the collapse of the Tokugawa shogunate than aliens. At least, I don't think so. Now, Gintoki is a play off Sakata Kintoki, who is a famous samurai, though a lot of his exploits mixed with legends, so it's really hard to figure out the reality of what he really did. His exploits ended up spawning the folk hero Kintaro, literally Golden Boy, and that muddies up a lot of things. What we do know for sure is that Kintoki, the real man, fought the demons of Mount Otei, and Kintaro was from some fantasy land known as Japan. Wait a minute. Jokes aside, you don't actually have to know any of this to understand the jokes in Gintama. It helps with some of the gags, but the series itself gives you plenty of context, and the characters are very loosely based off the figures they're essentially making fun of anyway, so don't think you need to crack open a history book in order to enjoy Gintama. If anything, the humor of this series is something you would rather turn your brain off for. Gintama is exceptionally goofy. I already mentioned that there's a lot of jabs at Japanese culture and references to other popular media, but it goes a step further beyond that. Like, you can have jokes where a guy is forced to wipe his ass with sandpaper, or two dudes are just spamming death threats to each other in a forum. Gintama, if I had to describe it, is sort of like a Japanese version of South Park. You have this mixture of pure, unfiltered stupidity, stacked right next to some of the most thought-out and clever jokes you've heard in a while. In-depth Death Note-style mind games, entire stylistic changes, sometimes just tons of toilet humor and vulgarity. Gintama can rapidly ping-pong between these tones, sometimes they can happen in the same episode. It's pretty insane. Hell, one of the premieres for a new season was a direct shot-for-shot parody of an actual incident where a Japanese politician broke down on live television because of an embezzlement scandal. Only in the episode, they change it to where they're announcing a new season of Gintama and they have to publicly apologize for it because the movie made too much money. Yeah, it's pretty good. Gintama quite literally covers about any joke you can imagine. Hell, this is actually a case where I have to say that you want to not only sit down and read the manga, but watch the anime as well, because both are completely unique experiences due to how they handle their mediums. Both have their own unique jokes, with the anime taking advantage of filler by just having the characters bullshit and waste time, even outright addressing that that's what they're doing and the audience is watching filler. They're playing into it. It's also boosted up by its cast. The cast in Gintama are great and they have a lot of energy to their roles, to the point that it can be hard not to immediately think of Gintama if you hear the actors and anything else. The most obvious example is Gintoki himself, played by Tomokazu Sugita. The guy fits Gintoki like a glove, and his performance is really something special. Now, the guy is a pretty prolific voice actor in Japan, and a lot of you guys who have never heard of Gintama before have at the very least heard him in other stuff. Dude was in things like Assassination Classroom, he's Yusuke in the Japanese dub of Persona 5, but the biggest example, without a doubt, is Joseph in Part 2 JoJo. Part 2 was top tier, and you all know I'm right. But the dude's a fucking legend as Gintoki, since he just seems to get the character. He's able to naturally flow from this complete dipshit, a lazy man-child that makes excuses to blow off work and go drinking, to this put-together and genuinely badass samurai. And the moments where the actors are clearly ad-libbing show that he's more than capable of leading the charge with a comedy. Dude puts a ton of energy into the role, and some scenes will have you cringing at the amount of strain he put on his vocal cords. Press F, bros. He did it all for our entertainment. The other obvious highlight is Rie Kugamiya as Kagura, who is another extremely famous voice actress. Honestly, wouldn't be too far off to say she's basically Jennifer Hale for Japan. She's been in everything, from Yakuza to Fullmetal Alchemist. She's currently in Jujutsu Kaisen, Undead Unluck. Her credits page is massive, enough said. And she's pretty good as Kagura, not just because she's just as energetic as Gintoki, but the actual way of speaking for Kagura must have been one hell of a challenge. I mentioned before that Kagura is an alien, so she doesn't just speak Japanese. Well, a gimmick with the character is that her race is sort of reminiscent of old school China. Kagura's clothes are literally based off Chinese fashion, so the idea is she was supposed to speak like a Chinese immigrant learning Japanese. Her way of talking is rough. On top of just having a blunt personality, one of her quirks is that she tends to end her sentence with aru, which is meant to be a running gag since it's apparently a common jab at how Japanese people sound trying to do a Chinese accent. The actress essentially has to put on an accent for the character, intentionally make her sound stilted and awkward, and keep that going even if the scene requires her to scream or monologue, which is pretty impressive.
お嬢ちゃんも若いからって後先考えずに行動しちゃいけないよ。
おめえに言われたくねえよ、負け組が。
The last one I want to mention is Daisuke Sakaguchi as Shinpachi. This is a case where the guy kind of flies under the radar compared to the other two, since he has to be the straight man. That is, he's meant to be the boring fun spoiler. That's the intent, but anyone that knows Gintama can already call bullshit on that statement. I mentioned how some scenes make you feel bad for Sugita's vocal cords. Well, that statement's 100 times worse for Shinpachi. The dude screams his head off through the whole series, to the point that the moments where he's allowed to be more subtle with his humor can be surprising. They do happen, where he's more understated and quiet, but the guy has far more scenes where you realize he's not any better than the other two, and in fact, Gintoki or Kagura can be more the straight man than him.
お前は永遠に止まったおつーちゃんのおっぱいを揉み続ける権利を得たんだ。
大体この状況を利用してそんな卑劣な真似できるわけないでしょ。3時間くらいにしときます。
Now you might notice that I only really talked about the main trio. Well, it's because the cast is pretty fucking huge by the end. The most I can say is that if you put any time into watching anime, you'll be recognizing a ton of voices as you watch Gintama, which is either a blessing or a curse, depending on what character you recognize. Hijikata playing that one rapist in Heavenly Delusion was, yeah, I didn't see that one coming. Which is why the chemistry among the cast works so well. There's not really any dedicated role for the characters. If anything, they're outright mocking the very idea of it. And the mockery can be pretty damn in-depth, taking a sledgehammer to manga tropes, formulas, even the process of editing manga or an episode of the anime, breaking the fourth wall to take potshots at itself as a franchise. Gintoki, who you'd think is the typical Shounen Jump protagonist, is an almost 30-year-old man-child. He can be cowardly, fuck people over, hates exercise. The guy is nowhere near what you'd think a typical anime hero is. This is even a direct joke multiple times, with Gintoki refusing to tell people his age because anime protagonists aren't supposed to be old. Shinpachi, who's usually the lackey manservant that talks about how cool the protag is or acts like his rival, butts heads with Gintoki constantly, mainly because he's forced to do the work nobody else wants to do. He refers to himself constantly as the straight man, even when the anime itself calls him out on it, since he's a psychotically obsessed fanboy that's borderline stalking a pop idol, and the dude can be so crazy that he'd call me Mania from Perfect Blue a casual. Kagura is an explicit parody of the female lead in manga, being a vulgar tomboy that can be a little gross shit, making sex jokes, insulting people both intentionally and unintentionally, and being a part of the large chunk of the toilet humor. Hell, supposedly she was the first female lead for Shounen Jump to pick her nose and vomit on screen. There's a ton of jokes about how not feminine she is, and is actually one of the more mean-spirited characters in the manga. Not the most mean-spirited because they make that dude about as obvious as they can, but right now this is just the main trio. As stated, the cast is huge by the end, and everyone getting into Gintama will have their own personal favorites. Some of my favorite characters show up a good chunk into the series, including the best girl of the whole franchise. Tsukuyo is great, and if you disagree, you just have shit taste. Now, I mentioned in the beginning of the video that Gintama is more of a sitcom, and that's correct. A lot of story arcs can be summarized in quick phrases, some of them not even 3 words long. The Amnesia arc, the Gender Bend arc, the Nintendo Wii arc. The vast majority of Gintama relies on this to just come up with a quick reason to shove the characters into scenes together where their personalities clash and cause jokes. Depending on the arc, They can be used for more than just nonsensical punchlines. In fact, you have some of the more heartfelt arcs hidden in between a lot of goofy jokes, some of which have larger implications or reveal reasons why characters have the gimmicks that they do. These can be major discoveries that put their earlier actions into a new light. Still, you start Gintama for the comedy. The drama comes when you're already invested into the series. They basically act as do you care tests, and it can be a mixed bag. Some are smaller scale stuff, a story of a girl wanting to be a firefighter while her father figure thinks it's too dangerous, an old man with dementia making fireworks for his wife, a Kappa alien trying to be nice to a kid he's friends with. These small 1 or 2 chapter plot beats meant to shake things up, and even these can still be filled with plenty of jokes and gags to go along with it. Early Gintama is very much focused on comedy, with only small bits hinting towards drama in really any way. It's only as time went on did the series start building up an actual plot and stakes, and the dramatic arcs start building in length and complexity, to the point that they really get pretty fucking depressing at times. Gintama can really surprise you with how it can pull you in, to actually really care about its cast and its world, since there's actually a lot there when it's fully laid out, and you can go from barely caring about a character to realizing that they were one of the coolest dudes in the whole franchise. One of my favorites is Katsura, the leader of the anti-alien terrorist group. The guy is a complete idiot, almost as dumb as the leader of the Shinsengumi, Kondo. In fact, there's multiple gags that the two would probably be really good friends if they weren't diametrically opposed due to politics. Katsura is at first built up as the key to Gintoki's past, since the two fought together in the war against the aliens when they arrived to Earth, and is a terrorist plotting to take down the Japanese government, to drag the world into war with the aliens again. But he's quickly subverted into being a gag character. In fact, he's responsible for some of the funniest jokes in the whole franchise. He's completely ridiculous, resorting to whatever odd job he can think of in order to fund his group, even email scams and rap mixtapes. Plus, he's a blatant hypocrite, wanting to remove the aliens from Earth while still indulging in the technology they brought with them. One of the more understated jokes about Katsura is that he hates aliens, yet his best friend is Elizabeth, an alien immigrant that joins his terrorist group, and he never sees the contradiction there. In fact, Elizabeth ends up being a true believer in the cause. However, the guy is still a major player in the plot. Even if he's an idiot and a joke the majority of the time, the moments where he has to buck up and help Gintoki are pretty major. It's one of the key moments of the first actual serious beat, the Benezakura arc. Now, I mentioned him being a key to Gintoki's past, and that's because they actually do a pretty good job at hiding his backstory. Granted, a lot of the series just never really needs to talk about it, but even when the stakes start rising, they keep their cards close to their chest on who exactly Gintoki is. The most you know is that he was a former rebel samurai, and he was a damn good fighter, enough so that he earned the nickname the White Demon, and Katsura spends the early parts of Gintama trying to talk him into joining his terror group. It's only when things really get going do you start getting more, specifically with the arrival of a character named Takasugi. He's really the first character who shows up that isn't just a two-dimensional bad guy or a joke, and he ends up being the sign that the story's getting more serious. Takasugi was also a former comrade of Gintoki, but he's substantially more violent and evil, even compared to the literal extremist. He winds up drifting to the various villains of Gintama, the real ones that actually do take up the serious arcs. That's not to say he doesn't get his own jokes, but it's usually never really anything he says or does himself. They usually poke fun at how long stretches of story can pass without him showing up.
4位とか意味わかんないですよね。何もやってませんよこいつ。ただ包帯巻いてるだけで4位ですよ。
Or other characters around him do something ridiculous, because he also gets his own party of followers. Another character who's a sign of shit going down is Kagura's brother Kamui. He's one of the main antagonists of the series, showing up and fighting in almost every single serious arc after he's introduced, and in fact becomes a major player in the finale. He's basically an evil version of Kagura, using his insane strength to kill anyone he deems as weaker, and he becomes fascinated with Gintoki, a regular human, for being able to put up a fight against him. Kagura's family in general ends up being very, very important, but not all of them are just there for serious stuff. Her dad, Umibozo, not that one, in particular winds up being a very comedic character. There's not too many main villains in Gintama. In fact, describing really any of them dips into major spoilers, because once the final arc rolls around, shit goes from 0 to 100 real fast. And the point is that each serious arc reveals more about the cast, something that's built upon and serves to develop them beyond just being two-dimensional parodies of manga tropes. Gintama works because it doesn't take everything as a joke, and can have moments that are legitimately engaging. One of the more underrated arcs for this is the Shinsengumi and Crisis arc. For context, this is a ways into the series, a little bit before the halfway mark if you're watching the anime, since it's episodes 101 to 105, but also it's chapters 158 to 168 in the manga.
Now, this should go without saying, but spoiler warning for the Shinsengumi in Crisis arc. And honestly, just be wary of spoilers from here on out. Loli doesn't go completely in depth, but he does explain plot details and themes. So somebody that would want to go in completely blind might have their experience ruined. Just be careful, everybody.
The setup is that the vice captain of the Shinsengumi, Hijikata, receives a cursed sword. Said sword is possessed by the spirit of a loser otaku that was murdered by his mother for refusing to get a job, and now the curse is slowly turning Hijikata into an anime-obsessed neckbeard. Hey, glass houses there, Gintama. Still, Hijikata's reputation in the Shinsengumi was of a hard ass that expected utmost perfection from his men, so him turning into a shut-in loser has major consequences, resulting in a new vice captain being appointed, a guy by the name of Ito. At first, the arc is just a goofy comedy thing, with Hijikata being taken over and turned into a nerd like Shinpachi, even doing a debate on national TV over who's the bigger loser, guys who buy anime figures or guys obsessed with pop idols. This isn't an exaggeration, this actually happens. As it turns out, the newly appointed vice captain is a power-hungry maniac, setting up a rebellion in the ranks of the Shinsengumi, planning on assassinating key figures and supplanting Kondo as the leader. While the jokes with Hijikata are there and end up wrapping into the main story of the arc by the end, the actual conspiracy stuff is handled completely straight. Ito isn't a joke villain or someone who's there for 5 minutes to wrap up an episode. He's given time to sink into his role. His motivations are clear and make sense. He's not the best villain in the series, not by a long shot, because there's some pretty great ones in Gintama, but you see what I mean where the series knows when to stop telling jokes and actually try to build something of its own. Hell, this arc actually has one of my favorite Gintoki moments where you realize the dude is dealing with a form of survivor's guilt from the war, something that makes him obsessed with keeping his new group of friends safe, almost ripping off his arms to go save the others after being cornered by Ito and his goons. And this detail is expanded on further with each new serious arc that pops up. Hell, the Four Devas arc is specifically all about this. His rivalry with Jirocho sparks off specifically because he attacked someone that Gintoki was very close with. By the way, their fight in the graveyard is pretty Kino shit. One of the best moments, period. In the aftermath of said fight goes the extra mile to show the actual weight of the situation, with the main trio devastated by what happened and scrambling to try to fix it. Another great example is the Yoshiwara arcs. Now, if you watch the anime, these will be split apart a bit further, but for the manga, these happen in pretty rapid succession. You have Yoshiwara in Flames and the Red Spider arcs, both revolving around the red light district of Yoshiwara. The In Flames arc happens at chapters 210 to 228 of the manga and episodes 139 to 146 in the anime. Red Spider is at chapters 254 to 262 and episodes 177 to 181. So as stated, the anime has a bit more of a pause to it compared to the manga. Also something to note is that this period of the story introduces Sekoyo, aka the best girl of the franchise, and any deniers aren't worthy of the Kanzai accent drunk assassin wife. Regardless, Yoshiwara is shown to be a spaceport turned into a major prostitution hub. Yoshiwara in Flames introduces the district and reveals that it's under the control of a crime lord that has enslaved countless women to be his property. Hosen. This is really the first arc in Gintama that things just outright become grim. Sure, Ben and Zakura and Shinsengumi in Crisis could be high stakes, but it was still pulpy and fun. Yoshiwara and Red Spider dips into subject matter that's just downright unpleasant, like sexual abuse, forced prostitution, human slavery, people forced to kill those wanting to escape in fear of retribution from a dictator. Yoshiwara very much treats these as serious problems, and you really grow to despise Hosen by the end. It does a great job of giving you an unrepentant bad guy that simply enjoys causing suffering. He feels entitled to Earth's women because he's a Yato, the same race as Kagura, so he just sees it as conquering the weak. They deserve what's happening to them because they can't do anything to stop it. It's fun to see Gintoki and the others fight him, because the arc does a good job of showing how important it is to take him down. Usually when you hear about a comedy series dipping into more grim subject matter, the first assumption you have is that it'll either be preachy or completely mishandle it by having no clue what the hell it's even saying. The Family Guy episode where Quagmire's sister is beaten by her husband, for a hilarious example, for all the wrong reasons. It can be hard to balance the scales if you're so used to one road, but Gintama is able to give you enough of a balance to make this work. Hell, it even doubles down on it in the Red Spider arc. It serves as sort of a sequel to Yoshiwara in Flames, revolving around Sekoyo and her history. This arc also sets up a pretty interesting villain that is taken 100% seriously, Jiraiya. While Hosen is a totalitarian scumbag, Jiraiya is more just outright psychotic, a sadistic assassin obsessed with Sekoyo, his former student, and is out to kill everyone she's grown close to as part of his process when he picks a new target. This one has more moments of levity, mainly because it doesn't have to worry about much darker concepts that Yoshiwara and Flames handled, but still manages to build up Jiraiya as a legitimate villain, someone capable of quite a lot of damage, an actual homicidal psychopath with his own goals and reasons that aren't just jokes. And it ends with one of the more standout fights in the series. The point is that Gintama knows how to handle dark subject matter very well. It's more than capable of starting off an arc with just laughs and hijinks, and by the end, it's a completely different beast. It's especially funny because when the manga was first starting off, it damn near got cancelled. It just couldn't really get off the ground, and Sorachi put a lot of work into keeping Gintama going until he found his footing. There's even multiple chapters that parody Sorachi himself dealing with editors, and shows how much work it took to get Gintama to where it is today. It's a very self-aware series in multiple ways, not just that it breaks the fourth wall either. There's a lot of thought put into the manga, which just looking at it from the outside probably wouldn't click with you at first. I already explained the layers of humor. I can go from dumbass toilet jokes and pop culture parodies to much more clever and thought-out satire. Hell, I already mentioned how a bunch of the characters are based off historical figures from Edo period Japan. Even plot points can be influenced by history, and knowing who the figure being made fun of is can almost be a spoiler for future events. I'm not even kidding. And this is in the same series where the author made the name Silver Balls because he thought it was funny. Yeah, Gintama means silver balls. The title itself is a testicle joke, which is really emblematic of what you're getting with Gintama. At first glance, you don't really think anything of it. Then you sit down and put time into it and find an endless rabbit hole of jokes, genuine kick-ass, and insanity. And it only gets deeper the more you think about it. It's why I said to both read the manga and watch the anime, because since the two are different mediums, you can end up with wildly different experiences. Sunrise handled the anime, and they were allowed to go wild with the source material, adding their own in-jokes and bits that feel completely in spirit to what Gintama is. Hell, they even ended up adding a layer to the jokes with Elizabeth, the alien that follows Katsu around. The joke is that it's very obviously a man in a costume, something that actually comes into play way later. But you never find out the true identity of who it is. Well, the anime expands on the joke by making a recurring gag that the anime director himself is one of the Elizabeths, Shinji Takamatsu. Yes, there are multiple Elizabeths, don't question it. Some of the filler also includes the gang going to Sunrise Studios and fucking with the team there. They even include jokes about how they can't reference certain franchises due to Sunrise not owning the license. It's to the point that the anime movies are considered completely canon. Granted, two of them cheat. Benizakura is just a re-edited version of the arc from the anime, something that was joked about for years in the anime itself, teasing fans with fake trailers to a movie version of Benizakura that was completely bullshit, only for it to become an actual thing in 2010, years later. And the final movie, Gintama The Final, just adapts the rest of the Silver Soul arc, which is the final arc of the manga, but the middle child is in a weird place. Be forever Yorizuya. It never took place in the manga, but Sorachi himself wrote it and drew the storyboard, so it's completely canon material, just anime only. And it serves as kind of a love letter since at the time it came out, the anime was coming to an end. Gintama, the anime, ended sometime in 2013, and the movie was made to give everyone a chance to ride off into the sunset. The movie is about giving the characters time to shine, and it really does feel like an ending for the series. Except the anime was brought back to life in 2015 or so. At first a whole new season, and eventually whittling down to essentially 12 episode OVAs, which makes sense as it was catching up on manga material, so seasons need to start rationing in order to meet episode demands, and the whole anime came to an end in 2021 with Gintama The Final. Altogether, if you wanted to sit down and watch Gintama, you have around 367 episodes, and 3 movies. Benizakura does add new scenes and animation, so it's not just watching the arc from the original, meaning you should check it out as well as the others too. Manga-wise, you have around 704 chapters, but they can be pretty damn quick, maybe around 20 pages or so, and it's a fast-paced comedy series, so you're not gonna really need that much time to get through it. It really doesn't take too long to make progress in the manga, in case the quantity sounded intimidating. Now, while I said you should check out both the manga and anime, I will add a condition here for safety's sake. The first 2 episodes are in a weird territory. It was an anime-only situation where they sort of chuck you in the deep end. Most of the cast is already introduced, and the episode acts like you know who they are. Plus, the entire plot amounts to giving a backstory to a background character that really doesn't matter in the grand scheme. If you're already well aware of the cast, I'd say go ahead and watch the 2-parter pilot, but if you're starting Gintama completely blind, it would be safe to skip and just start from episode 3. That's the actual beginning of the story, and it helps introduce you to the world and characters better. The very beginning of Gintama can drag, and the first 2 episodes especially so, because admittedly it's some of the rockier episodes of the anime. The jokes aren't bad, but you can tell it's not quite there yet. It'd be weird to even argue that you should skip them due to filler, because Gintama all around is like 95% filler if you want to get technical about it. It's more that you should wait until you have more context before checking it out. And to its credit, it does tell you right from the get-go what to expect from Gintama. Batshit insanity. Still, it doesn't hold a candle to some of the later comedy arcs. The bathhouse one had me in tears, it's fantastic. Another thing I want to bring up about Gintama is the music. I actually really like the soundtrack to the anime. It has a fun J-rock style, moments punched up by guitar riffs and solos during action scenes, stuff like that. And the intro-outro music goes down as GOAT level stuff. Mr. Raindrop is an earworm that is just fun to listen to, and I've put it on multiple times just for the hell of it. And probably my favorite out of all the tracks is Samurai Heart. It's a damn good outro song that meshes with the Four Devas arc very well. And this isn't just my opinion. It's been voted as a fan favorite more than once. Still, there's a ton of good music hidden in Gintama, and you all have your own personal favorites to pick and choose from. Trust me, it's a pretty wide list. I want to be vague about actual plot spoilers for Gintama, mainly because it's meant to be a fun surprise when you notice that things start getting dire. All I will say is that the ending to the series gives a lot of great moments for characters. Even people who devolved into complete jokes are given their time to shine. Plus, it manages some redemption arcs for characters you never thought would get them. And the actual main villain of the series is one of the more slept-on antagonists in anime. He has a lot of history that you see get laid out, and his plans make sense for what he wants to do, managing to be a tragic villain that is still hateable, but also can be legitimately compelling to watch. Now, just name-dropping who the villain is can be a major spoiler, just showing him on screen can give it away, so just know that the finale of Gintama is pretty damn satisfying for how the character is handled. And the themes around him dip into surprising amounts of existentialism, which you wouldn't think would be handled by a comedy show with dick jokes. The final thing I want to talk about are some of the adaptations of the series, not just the anime. There's been other stuff as well. For one, the live-action movies. Yeah, Gintama has been adapted into live action. 2 live-action movies and a short little 3-episode miniseries to build hype for the second film. The first live-action movie is an adaptation to the Ben Azakura arc. For some reason, studios love giving this arc tons of attention, but fuck it, whatever. In true Gintama fashion, there are a ton of references to the fact the film is in live action. And to the movie's credit, the actors that got to portray the characters aren't half bad. Now, the actual structure of the movie is interesting. It weaves in the more slice-of-life comedy parts into a setup for the actual main plot, and for the first film, it's the chapter where they go beetle hunting. You get a first act dedicated to the comedy, and then it tries to shift into the more dramatic parts. And to get right out of the way, yeah, the movies look pretty damn cheap. They clearly aren't working with a ton of money. Hell, the aliens are literally just guys wearing masks they got from stores. Plus, the CGI is really obvious. Live-action Sadaharu is gonna haunt my nightmares for a while. But Elizabeth literally just being a guy in a suit, that's beyond fitting. Like, that actually just makes sense. But in a way, it's actually pretty close to what Gintama is going for. It's self-aware about a lot of itself, and it goes as far as it can to emulate the cartoon logic of the original series. At times, it is downright word for word, scene by scene. It's actually as close to an adaptation of the anime as you can get. Now, I think the first movie is kind of rocky. It's definitely shaky on purpose. There's outright jokes about how they didn't think Gintama would ever get a movie, and they do the best they can to adapt the Ben Azakura arc. But despite this, a lot of the actual action scenes can look kinda wonky. There's obvious camera tricks to hide the choreography, and they only ever let you see the big spectacle stuff they can nail down. The cast of the movie all do a good job though. You can tell they have a lot of fun going back and forth, and they managed to nail the look and feel of the characters. Shunagori is pretty damn fun as Gintoki. I felt like he was able to really embody the guy and come off as naturally charismatic, even if he's not as batshit crazy, at least in the first movie. Kana Hashimoto clearly had tons of fun playing Kagura. She put a lot of energy into the role and seemed like she was enjoying every second of it. You even had a cameo by Juro Sato, who does his usual business of chewing the scenery up into pieces. He was pretty good. I liked him in this. Point being that the first film felt like a good groundwork for what a live-action Gintama should be, just one that clearly didn't have the money they needed, which resulted in it not looking much different from an indie fan film. Not a bad one, but a fan film nonetheless. Also, there was supposed to be a cameo from another Japanese comedian as well, Gali Galaxon, but he was arrested for drunk driving during production, so his scenes had to be cut. Fucking rip. Now, the second movie is sort of a direct sequel, this time covering the Shinsengumi and Crisis arc. Once again, it adapts the more comedic chapters as a sort of lean into the actual story, specifically the chapters where the gang run into the Shogun and end up screwing the pooch horribly, both at the Hostess Club and the barber shop. They are pretty much shot-for-shot versions of the chapters, so they were tons of fun. Also, I do have a sneaking suspicion that the sequel was given a higher budget, because there was a lot more refinement in this movie compared to the first. The lighting looks sleeker and it puts more effort into the special effects, there's a wider scale. The scene with the Shogun at the barber actually didn't look half bad for a prosthetic. I mean, it looks ridiculous, but it is a comedy. It's supposed to look over the top and weird. Another thing I'll mention is that this has a pretty major deviation from the manga and how it handles the story arc. So for the actual Shinsengumi and Crisis story, Hijikata receives a cursed sword, one that turns him into an otaku, and thus is useless at his job. But in the second film, he's shot in the back of the neck by a microchip. It's not a big change, and one I fully think is done for the sake of time. since they no longer had to explain the origin of the sword or the actual spirit possessing Hijikata, because that shows up over and over again after the arc. It's actually pretty recurring. They still cover most every scene of him being pathetic, even the idol versus anime debate where him and Shippachi start a riot. It's just a noticeable difference that will probably annoy a purist. Personally, I don't think it's a big deal because it already has to fit a large story arc into a 2-hour film, and Gintama shifting details for the sake of adaptation isn't really anything new. A big question in regards to live action stuff is who exactly are they aimed for? Longtime fans that would want to see the material in live action, or newcomers that can use it as an introduction to Gintama? Personally, I think the answer is more so the former than the latter. These are pretty direct adaptations to later chapters, and it operates off the idea that you are aware of the cast and their dynamics. There's even jokes that are lifted from the anime as direct references, like the CGI introduction in the first movie, which points out how the introduction of Gintoki is warped to make him look cooler. It's something that people that have no context for Gintama would probably be pretty confused by. That's not to say it's impossible for someone who never got into the series to enjoy the movies, just that this is very much a project meant to appeal to fans. They're a celebration of Gintama. To advertise the second movie, there were even 3 shorts that adapted some of the more joke chapters, like Kagura having insomnia, Hijikawa's quest to find a place to smoke, and the arrival of Sogo's sister. Fun little episodes to keep the live action stuff going, and keep Gintama in the public consciousness a bit more. Now the other question to ask is, how is Gintama represented in video games? To be honest, not the best. It's a franchise with some serious shovelware, DS party games, a few appearances in Jump Stars, and the only real dedicated game it's had for a long ass time is Gintama Rumble, which is Japan exclusive, and a Dynasty Warriors clone. Other than that, it's pretty barren, so if you're hoping for any hidden gem video games you could pick up as a fan of Gintama, you're kinda screwed. I mean, Rumble is decent enough fun if you like Dynasty Warriors, but that's not exactly hype as shit material, you know? And in all fairness, it can't be easy to think about how you could do a Gintama game. There's no dedicated combat system or gimmick to exploit. I mean, that's been a joke in the series over and over again, and the vast majority of the series is just sitcom goofiness. So maybe something like Yakuza, where you're exploring a city and getting into hijinks through sub-stories, but even then, that's a major stretch, and I don't think is really worth the effort, at least how I see it. Still, the anime and manga are fucking awesome, so that's all that matters. And Sorachi's still hard at work making stuff. There's an entire spin-off of Gintama called Ginpachi Sensei, where the characters are in high school under the guidance of Gintoki. It started as a running joke at the end of chapters and just sort of blew up into a larger project, becoming a series of light novels that recently were announced to be getting their own anime. It's more Gintama, so hey, that's pretty cool. All in all, this is all I can really say about Gintama. It's a fun as hell series, able to have absolutely batshit insane chaotic humor right alongside more thoughtful and emotional moments that you can take seriously. I highly recommend you guys sit down and give this franchise a shot. It can be a bit of a beast for length, but you'd be amazed how quickly it can suck you in. This series is one of Shounen Jump's all-time greats, and I say that with zero hesitation. And it ended up inspiring other franchises, the most obvious one being Sket Dance, since that was made by the former assistant to Sorachi, and the 2 series even had a crossover event. Yeah, little fun stuff like that. Gintama is something I can't recommend highly enough, and hopefully this video encouraged you guys to check it out. Or if you dipped out early because it wasn't clicking, hopefully you'll give it another shot. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
それでは皆さん永久に不潔ですいませんでした
Hey loser, do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're gonna be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's gonna look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how they're not, you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.